Okay, let's just jump right into it. Have you ever actually stopped to think about how we understand each other? I mean, how we really establish a shared meaning in just everyday, run of the mill interactions? It's honestly something we do so flawlessly that we take the whole thing completely for granted. But the mechanics behind it, they are absolutely fascinating. So, in this explainer, we're going to map out the broader landscape of sociological theory, and then we're going to zoom way in on the microscopic gears of human communication. We'll be looking at how our shared reality is literally built, piece by piece, second by second.
Now, to really grasp the deep, almost invisible mechanics of social interaction, we first need to get our bearings. Let's take a look at the macro-level map of sociology. As you can see, a standard breakdown of Unit 1 in sociological theory includes your classical traditions, structuralism, Indian thinkers, and postmodernism. But the area I want to draw your attention to right now is point number 3, the hermeneutic and interpretive traditions, because you guys, this is where the magic happens when it comes to understanding subjective human experience. If you look closely at the list of thinkers under that interpretive umbrella, specifically at numbers 3 and 4, we have two absolute heavyweights sitting right next to each other, Alfred Schutz and Harold Garfinkel. Now, on the surface, their theories can honestly seem worlds apart, but a really brilliant paper by researcher Lillian Coates reveals this fascinating historical and theoretical connection between them. Specifically, she looks at how they both understood the flow of time and this sequence of human action. So here's our roadmap for today. We're mapping sociological theories, looking at Schutz and the solitary ego, the process of understanding, Garfinkel and public order, and finally, meaning in the vivid present. Think of this explainer like a funnel. We're starting with this broad structural overview of sociology, and we're going to move right down into a hyper-specific comparison of time, consciousness, and human interaction. All right, Section 1, Schutz and the solitary ego. Let's start with Alfred Schutz. He actually built his early theories on a highly philosophical premise, the idea of the solitary ego and the internal flow of time consciousness. Schutz makes this absolutely crucial distinction between experiencing and having an experience. So experiencing is just living in the continuous unidirectional stream of the present. It doesn't have any sharp boundaries. It's just the raw, unbroken flow of life. And in that raw state, Schutz argues, it's actually meaningless. Meaning only happens when we have an experience. Basically, that's when our consciousness hits pause, looks backward retrospectively, and deliberately lifts a discrete moment out of the stream to give it meaning. We literally have to look back to make sense of what just happened. And this brilliantly illustrates how that exact same flow of time applies to our physical actions. Schutz argues that our actions are driven by two types of motives linked to time. First, you have your in order to motives. This is the projected goal of an act you anticipate completing. So, for example, you open an umbrella in order to stay dry. You're looking forward to the completed state, right? But that forward-looking action is built entirely upon because motives, which look backward. You open the umbrella because your past experiences have taught you that rain makes you wet. So our very actions are essentially suspended right between backward reflections and forward anticipations. Moving on to Section 2, the process of understanding. Now, you might be wondering, if we're all just isolated, solitary egos, totally trapped in our own private, retrospective reflections and personal motives, how do we ever successfully understand someone else? I mean, if your consciousness is strictly inaccessible to me and mine is to you, how does society even function? It's a massive problem for social science. To solve this, Schutz argued that we use something called pragmatic attribution. Because I can't literally read your mind, obviously, I rely on a routine method. I reflect on my own lived experience. If I see you wave your hand, I basically imagine what I would have meant if I had made that exact same movement. I put myself in your shoes. So my understanding of your subjective meaning isn't some kind of perfect mind reading. It is, at best, a pragmatic approximation based entirely on my own internal catalog of experiences. But things get incredibly dynamic when we physically get together. Just look at this beautiful quote from Schutz. This interlocking of glances, this thousand-faceted mirroring of each other, is one of the unique features of the face-to-face situation. He called this the we relationship. When we're face-to-face, actually sharing a vivid present, we aren't just guessing in a vacuum anymore. We're providing each other with continuous empirical feedback. I say something, you react, your reaction tells me exactly how you understood me, and then I adjust my next action based on that. Our motives interlock sequentially, kind of like gears turning each other. Which brings us to Section 3, Harold Garfinkel and public order.
While Schutz laid all that amazing groundwork by looking at the sequence of time within private minds, Harold Garfinkel came along and radically transformed those insights for the observable world. Garfinkel essentially said, you know what? Forget the solitary ego. He developed ethnomethodology, completely abandoning the idea of isolated consciousness. Instead, he focused on the empirical, observable investigation of how people practically, physically, and cooperatively build a shared public order in concrete situations. When we compare the two of them head-to-head, Schutz approached human understanding through the cognitive attribution of meaning within isolated private minds, so it was very internal. Garfinkel, on the other hand, took the focus outward. He cared about public order and situated practice. He asked, how do we build reality out in the open, together, through observable actions? Garfinkel honestly didn't care about what was hidden in your head. He only cared about what you were actively displaying right there in the room. And that leads us to this striking quote from Garfinkel's early manuscript, Seeing Sociologically. As far as the problems of communication are concerned, any sign can signify anything. This is mind-blowing if you really think about it. It actually anticipates his famous concept of indicality. What it means is that words and actions don't have these fixed, rigid meanings just hovering in the air outside of context. A word means something specific because of its sequential placement in a conversation. We have to continuously, cooperatively negotiate order, because context and sequence are literally everything. And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, meaning in the vivid present. Despite their totally different starting points, Schutz in the private mind and Garfinkel in the public square, both thinkers actually converge on a critical insight, the flow of time and the sequential next turn. Both theorists reveal that human communication is absolutely not a passive stimulus-response reaction. It's a highly active sequential process. When you speak, the next turn that I take in the conversation actively displays my practical understanding of your prior turn. The meaning of what we're doing is built, step by step, entirely by where we place our actions in the sequence. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept in the real world. Garfinkel actually proved this by studying a team of astrophysicists who were in the middle of discovering a pulsar. He listened to the tape recordings of the scientists on the very night of the discovery. And what he found was that scientific reality isn't just found sitting out there in the dark. It is sequentially built and negotiated moment by moment. The scientists didn't just follow a textbook rule, they worked out their observations in real time through hands-on practice. The discovery of the pulsar was tied directly to the contingent, turn-by-turn progression of their collaborative work that night. They quite literally built their shared reality sequentially. Ultimately, what this explainer highlights is the temporal succession of here-and-now situations. Whether we're looking at the solitary mind reflecting on its own flow of consciousness, or a team of astrophysicists staring at data in an observatory, our shared reality is a highly active, sequentially organized phenomenon. We're constantly moving from one here and now to the absolute next, building meaning like laying bricks on a path as we walk it. But I want to leave you with a somewhat provocative thought. If social order isn't some permanent, rigid structure, but rather requires constant, cooperative, sequential work, what would happen if we deliberately refuse to play along? What actually happens if you intentionally provide the wrong next turn? That very question opens the door to Garfinkel's famous and honestly hilarious breaching experiments. But that is a fascinating explainer for another day. Thanks so much for joining me. Keep questioning the everyday, and I'll catch you next time.